Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. If you spend any time on social media, you know it's full of all kinds of random trends, and one thing that continually shows up over and over again in the sea of algorithmic information is this trend of trad life posters. You have trad wives, you have people doing prep, you have people doing different things around their house to try to turn it into something closer to a sustainable farm. You have people trying to create traditional art, get back to their roots. There's a lot of this stuff everywhere. And the thing that's really been sitting on the top of my mind is, can this actually return us to tradition? Is there a way that this can lead us back to more organic and healthier ways of being? Or has this stuff just turned into some kind of abstract pornography? It's ruined by the medium itself. Somebody who thinks a lot about digital life and how it applies to our spiritual well-being is author and host of Zero Hour, James Poulos. Thanks for joining me today, James.
Absolutely. Good to be with you.
We're going to get into the TikTok trend that has been coming up right now about grave cleaning, how that connects to traditional life, honoring one's ancestors. Is this something that can actually lead us back to a value that will bind us into the great chain of being? Or is this just more information and entertainment to pour over us and pull us away from real life? We'll get into all that, guys. But before we do, let me tell you a little bit about job stacking. Hey, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor, job stacking. More paychecks, less hustle, working from home. That's what job stacking is all about. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then consider joining the Job Stacking Mentorship Program. The program is designed by Ralph Haltza, the creator of Job Stacking, to help you successfully implement a strategy that will allow you to collect multiple paychecks from different jobs without burning out or getting caught by employers. Job stacking has already helped many people double or even triple their incomes. Luke Hill, a financial analyst living in the UK, has used job stacking to stack 3 different jobs and went from making $5K a month to $15K a month. But job stacking isn't just about increasing incomes. It's also about helping our guys gain more independence by no longer being a slave to debt or a single employer who hates their values. Andrew Gustafsson, a credit analyst from Australia, is now stacking 4 salaries, which he has used to pay off his personal and student debt and buy a home for his family. If you don't currently have a remote job, no worries. The program is also designed to help you land remote jobs so that you can go ahead and get started. So if you want to double your income and stop relying on a single paycheck from a woke employer, go to jobstacking.com/start now. That's jobstacking.com/start now and book a call with Rolf today. All right, so like I was saying, I've been seeing a lot of this trend all over social media, very popular. Of course, girls going through wheat fields and, you know, the different lives that trad wives can now lead. You even had the trend of stay-at-home girlfriends, the LARPing as the wife. They just don't need the commitment, all of these things, right? But there's something fetishized about, you know, women sitting there and actually doing laundry or taking care of the house. All of a sudden, this is something that becomes digital content. And then I came across this video. This is from The Clean Girl. She has a TikTok and a YouTube. It's a lot of her, as you would expect, cleaning a bunch of things. She cleans up beaches. She cleans up other things. But the thing that she is focused on in many of her videos is cleaning grave sites. Let me play this for everybody real quick so they know what we're talking about here.
A random grave. Who do you think is buried here?
Let's clean it and find out.
I have so many questions. How old is this grave?
It looks like it's been here for 500 years.
How did this grave get so dirty? Look, there's a tree growing out of it.
I love plants.
This transformation is extremely hard for me, but I believe everyone deserves a beautiful grave.
Okay, so I did some research.
A woman is buried here, and she has 2 brothers, just like me. I need to make her family proud. This is so satisfying. I wish I could live in the graveyard. Are you ready to find out who's buried here? Maria Lugo Texador. She died on the 19th of January, 1990.
I get to do this work because you support and
All right, so you get the idea here. Obviously, the affectation is pretty annoying. The approach is specifically one geared towards social media and attention. But I do have to say, of all of the much more focused trad life posting with the sundresses or the I'm churning butter in the most specific and old way, this does have some connection to what was a much more traditional behavior, caring about your ancestors, caring about the condition of their final resting place, taking a moment to honor, that they are remembered, and that perhaps if one of the more ancient ancestor worshiping civilizations, that you're caring for them in the afterlife by caring for their gravesite there. What do you think about this approach, James? Any hope that this can tether people back to an understanding of something important about life or spirituality?
Well, there's always hope. We don't know. We don't know what it is that someone's going to come across in their real life, in their real experience, that might turn their heart around toward a spiritual reawakening or rebirth. It's oftentimes not up to us, although of course we can sometimes play that role in people's lives. Although you can't just go up to someone and force them to have this experience, right? And so the question is, can it happen over the internet? There's no reason why it can't, but obviously we wouldn't want that to replace what happens offline, what happens in real life. And there are a lot of contradictions in what you see in a video like that. Plenty to critique, plenty to defend. An infinite number of attorneys in an infinite number of courtrooms could litigate the relative merits or demerits of that video for infinity. And I think what's most important about content like that and our experience with it is to not fall prey to that temptation to just become these sort of an infinite number of monkeys litigating an infinite number of pieces of content on the internet. That will drive us away from real life and deeper into a simulated life, more than the girl who's scrubbing the tombstone on TikTok. Would it be better if people scrubbed tombstones in secret? Yes, I think it would. But it's not. What am I really gaining from being the one to stand up and say your content sucks and you shouldn't be doing that? It's really not a very good use of my time or of anyone else's. So I think that's kind of my first cut.
Yeah, the critique of the thing takes you more into the thing. It gets you focused. You're accelerating down that pathway rather than saying, okay, well, if I don't like this, I'm just stepping away and finding some more meaningful thing to plug into. But I guess this brings us to the broader question, really, not so much that specific video, but what do you think about the general engagement with, I guess, tradition posting in digital spaces? Do you feel like the medium destroys the message in this way, that it's always going to suck us down this path of perhaps critique or more simulated lives? Or do you think that there is a positive side to this type of content showing up, and there's an interest, a yearning? Does this underlie a critical movement that is happening inside the culture? Or is it just, like I said, pornified? It's just, you're just taking something completely out of, deterritorializing it completely and putting it in a context into which it really can't connect to any traditional behavior or organic understanding of a healthy life.
Yeah, I mean, it's the porn is always an interesting case study or an example, because what is it really? And one concept of porn is that it's a simulation of sex. Yes, I guess there are some people involved having some sort of intercourse, but maybe not. Maybe it's just a couple AIs just moving the pixels around. There's another perspective which would say, well, no, it's not really simulated. It's real, and what you're doing is you're participating in a kind of telepathic form of physiological communication. And if you turn to kind of the loudest voices, I think, on the internet about the future of technology, the sensibility is one that says, like, hey, we just want these experiences to converge. The simulation and the telepathy can converge into one thing, and we can have this collective human consciousness and extend the light of that consciousness throughout the universe and become divinities, cyborg divinities, live happily ever after, or something. Regardless of how exactly you weigh that up in your minds, I think the proper lens to understand what's going on there, is that it's a temptation. It's always going to be tempting to some degree, even for people who think that it would be a tremendous travesty against man and God to go in that direction, or to try to go in that direction. So when I see trad content flooding various parts of the internet, I see the temptation to turn it into a simulation, or an automated simulation of what is or should be. But I also see, I see deep-seated yearnings in the human breast for a recovery of those forms, of those ways of being, a deep-seated longing to remember the past at all. That's in the mix. And then I see a deep-seated longing for people to communicate without words. There are so many freaking words flying around. A lot of them have lost their power, and some of them are being imbued with dark spiritual power. And I think it's commonsensical to reason that people in that kind of environment, where they're just overloaded with words, verbal communication, written communication, want to kind of retreat or recover the experience of a more visual language, a communication through imagery. And I think a lot of what makes that kind of trad content catch on and spread so well is, you can just hit that mute button, or just watch the feed without audio. And in some ways it says even more. Silence is powerful. And although these things can get muddled and there are temptations at every turn, I do think that clearly people are seeking out trad content because of how visual it is, and because of how its visual character pairs so well and is expressed so fully through a kind of silence, which, recovering silence in our lives and in our communication, that's very powerful too. And I think, this is a time when we would benefit from more of it, and when people are, whether they know it or not, seeking it out for that reason.
So a lot of people look at this type of content, and their first criticism is that what she's doing here is, and this would, of course, I would recognize this as well, it's separated from the actual connection. She's discovering who this person is. She says, oh, well, they had, siblings, the same number of siblings I did. So there's some interest in understanding who that person is, but it's not a big focus, right? It's more about just watching her do the thing that she's doing, which, like you said, could itself be more powerful than a lot of things that are said. But the criticism would be that she's really detached from what the maintenance of a grave would mean. Previously, the maintenance of a grave would be one that is part of your family or part of one of your community. It's a long line of ancestors that you have, and you care for this gravesite. You care for the tombstone. The people who come to that gravesite are there to honor the past. And so they have a very specific generational, particular connection to this background. And that when you take something like this and you uproot it from that, you break that connection, and you just are doing it for the act of the attention, these kind of things, that makes it harder for people to understand why that matters. And we see this across many of the trad content. Again, the people who are criticizing it most often are saying, oh, well, that person's not part of the real tradition. They're not really living in that mode. This is just some simulation they're doing on top of a very modern life. And there's no connection to a past or to a history or to a people. And so therefore it's separating people further and further away. Is there still a way in which this does connect people to those modes of being, even though it has been disconnected from those roots, that organic life from which it really was supposed to be born in?
Yeah, again, the criticisms are easy. It's so easy to criticize this stuff or any content or any person. And if we get stuck at the level of criticism, we are doing more harm, I think, than people who are out there at least trying to make something happen, trying to take some kind of action. This is maybe a weird comparison, but I think it holds true. There's a certain kind of Russia critic out there who loves like debunking people who say like, well, at least, it's sort of like more or less Christian country, and, whatever, they went through communism, it was really rough. And like, maybe there's something that we can learn there before our empire collapses and we find ourselves face to face with how incredibly culturally and spiritually impoverished so many of us have become. And it's easy to pile on those criticisms. Oh, they're all alcoholics. Oh, their abortion rate's so high. Oh, their TFR is so low or whatever. Okay. But what I see that's sort of like criticizing like a dog who got lost and is trying to find its way home. And it's like flea bitten and it's been through some fights and it's like eaten some roadkill and it's like trying to like crawl its way back to home. And a passerby is like, look at this pathetic creature. Like it's such a mess and you're never going to make it home. And like, oh, it's disgusting, laugh at it, poke it with a stick. That is the vibe of so much criticism. And the alternative to that kind of criticism is not enabling people, right? Enabling people, making excuses for people. This is not the only alternative to that kind of contemptuous criticism. You can have mercy on people. You can feel pity for people. You can recognize that people out there are profoundly culturally, spiritually impoverished. If you don't have the church, you don't have the extended family, you don't have the husband or the wife, you don't have the kids, you don't have much except one of these and an idea. And say what you will about these stupid phones, but if you have one and you have an idea and you have a yearning, you can actually just get up and go outside and do some stuff and put it in front of a large audience potentially. And does that mean that that's the way we should all live? No. Does it mean that people have these yearnings and they're coming to terms with the fact that in an incredibly brief period of time, a couple decades tops, America has gone from an extremely prosperous feeling, dominant feeling, confident feeling place into one where people are incredibly lost, confused, unhealthy, broken, unsure of how to proceed, frightened of their own tools, frightened of one another, unsure what's to come. What do you do with a civilization full of people like this? Do you mock them? Do you ridicule them? Do you kick them while they're down? Or do you try to meet them where they're at and try to find a way with a combination of sort of, tears and suffering, but also a feeling of joy in the fact that we're even still here at all. And we still have an opportunity to make something of ourselves spiritually, that it's really not too late. It's not, the apocalypse is literally not raining down on us. I think that's the better path. And, I think in the time that it takes to do a 3-hour deep dive into the cringiest, most pornified trad content and sort of, lambast it and ridicule it. In the time that it takes to do that, think of how else you could spend those 3 hours. Not that I think this conversation is a waste of time. Far
all the other ones. Right.
Well, maybe not all the other ones, but it's easy to see how that temptation to pull it into that sort of, Satan is not just the adversary, Satan is the accuser. And when we all take the form of the accuser, we are evacuating our personal given identity. We are burying our spiritual treasure, and we are becoming collaborators in a dehumanizing system. So, let's not do that. And let's find the opportunity. If that girl can go out and find a stranger's grave and clean it, yeah, maybe it's like 2 ASMR and maybe she sounds like she's a voiceover that was programmed by someone in China. But, maybe we can go out and find a person in real life and have an encounter with them that leaves us both better off and puts that spiritual treasure into circulation.
Yeah, I that really resonates with me. One of my favorite, or I should say one of my pet peeves, is the term LARP. Whenever someone is trying to better their lives, they're trying to reconnect to a tradition, they're trying to find something that is real. The thing that I've seen thrown most often at them is, "Oh, you're LARPing. You're just LARPing it. You don't really have any connection to this. It's not really a part of your life. It's all fake. It's all simulated." These kind of things. And I just look around. I am myself 40 years old, so I'm sitting right in that between. I'm on the edge of the millennial, closer to Gen X, but at the start of the millennial bracket. And
that's an exennial, right?
Yeah, there you go. And so many of the people that I know in my life are in this situation where they got to midlife and they didn't connect the way they were supposed to. They didn't build the traditions. They didn't build the bonds. They didn't build the faith. I was very lucky. I was very blessed. My parents were devoted Christians from the beginning. I always had an excellent home life. I always knew that God was real, and I always knew that, you know, Christianity was the way forward. But I am the exception among most of my friends. I'm incredibly blessed. Most people are not in this position. Many people don't believe, or they don't know how to believe. They're showing up to a church, but they feel awkward. They don't know what to do with it. They're trying to connect to the past, their history, but they just don't know where to start. And I think the worst thing in the world, the thing I hate the most, is really watching people who are taking that step, trying for the first time to really put themselves out there and connect in a meaningful way, a spiritual way. And then all of a sudden they have to hear all this. Oh, well, this is just LARPing. This is just fake. This, you know, this doesn't mean anything. You're not really ever going to get connected. It can't ever really mean anything to you. This is just the worst thing I see from people over and over again, especially, of course, online, where everyone wants to remind you that you can't possibly escape from, you know, we're all here chasing dopamine together. There's no way that you could actually connect to something real.
Well, look, I mean, it's of course very easy to surface the most foolish looking individuals in the world running around in some, you know, even more foolish costume, acting as if what they were doing was invested with some great spiritual significance that it sure seems to lack, right? It's easy to do that in the same way that it's easy for the local news to put the murder and the car crash and the car chase and the whatever, the break-in on the local news every night. It's the filter. As a result, I think a lot of people, when they think about LARPing, they think about an action, right? People out there acting, running around, wearing the costumes, doing whatever. When in reality, you know, the thing that matters even more than that is the LARP in our hearts. You know, like if you are BSing yourself in your heart about who you really are and what it is that you should really be doing, like that is where the rubber hits the road. But in that, you know, in that secret place in your heart, the only judge of whether or not you are LARPing in your heart is God. And, you know, that's not even the internet allows us to penetrate into the secret depths of everyone's heart. And were it to try to become that, that would, you know, that's a story for another day, but that would, I think that would be a terrible, terrible affront to God himself, and definitely a bad idea. So, gosh, you know, I mean, yeah, there's LARPing out there. It's always easy to pick on the biggest fools in town. But something that requires a little bit more spiritual discipline and strength and courage and honesty is to confront the fool within. It you know, it might even turn out that the fool within is not quite who you think he or she might be. So, you know, internet wants us to turn outward, wants us to look at appearances. But if we do that at the expense of looking inward, then we're really going to be in trouble.
One of the things that I think is most challenging for people who are trying to make that kind of more organic connection right now, something real in the real world, is that those connections tend to be very particular. And we live in a world that seems to be waging a war on the particular. Specifically in the digital realm, everything is connected. Yeah, everything is public. Everything is breaking down those barriers that would really define a specific connection. And I think that is a huge problem for people because they don't know where to begin, right? Like you can choose from any faith, you can choose from any music, you can choose from any time or place. You can immerse yourself and live in a simulation of any really period of pop culture in history. And it feels harder and harder to plug into something that is more grounded and specific and coming from a real community. Is that just a casualty of the digital age? Can the digital age facilitate that? Or is it only something that can kind of deterritorialize those more sacred things?
It seems so new. It seems so novel to be presented with this, you know, infinite sushi restaurant carousel of morsels to choose from, and to, you know, try to eat them all if you want. But it's actually not as new as it seems. That temptation to believe that the simulation of a thing is better than nothing. That has always been with us. You can go all the way back to the Garden of Eden with that, and you can go to, like, Milton, and you can go look at it's better to reign in hell than to serve in paradise. Once you are kicked out of paradise due to your own fault, that temptation is extremely strong to, like, well, if I can't have the real thing, then gosh darn it, we're going to make a fake of it, and we're going to make it so good that we forget that we are responsible for not having the real thing. That is not something that digital technology created. It's not the fault of digital technology that this is something that human beings keep returning to time and again, and do whatever they can to try to create that substitute. It's just that the substitute on offer is a shiny new object relative to TV or cinema or radio or the book or the alphabet or whatever. These tools can always be abused in this way. The temptation is always there, and this is you just seeing the fall play out every minute of every day in every era that human beings have ever lived in. And so for all of the for all the commonsensical hesitation that people feel when they really come face to face with the intensity of the promises that technology is being used to make about, no, really, this is it, guys. Like, this is the one. Like, this time we are going to create the fake paradise, and we are going to forget that we are kicked out of paradise because of our own, our own sin. When people realize that, they have different reactions, and some of those reactions are akin to the famous scene in The Matrix where I'm going to eat the juicy sizzling steak, even though I know that it's not a real juicy sizzling steak, because what's the alternative? The quip that I have started going back to try to help people at a glance get an understanding of, like, what this regime is from Ghostbusters, where the big bad appears at the end and says, "Choose the form of your destroyer." Like, that's choice. Maybe it's infinite choice. There are infinite ways of destroying yourself or offering yourself up as a blood sacrifice to a false god. And as long as if people just kind of kept that in mind when they approached things online, I think it would help probably give them a little bit more of the perspective that oftentimes the algorithm does not bump up to the top of everyone's feed.
So one of the things that I think a lot of people are looking for when they're looking for this traditional connection is community. That's what people seem to be missing more than anything else. The lives that we live are ones where we at least can make excuses for leaving our homes, leaving our families, never starting ones of our own, never plugging into faith. And suddenly you realize you're in the scenario where you don't have anyone around you who shares your values, shares your worldview, who you want to do life with. And people start to recognize that probably, the most important thing may not be chasing that paycheck or that degree or, that hedonistic experience, but there might be something to the fact that most people tended to live in these closer, tight-knit communities through their lives. And one of the trends I've really seen, and this is probably the most encouraging trend, is a lot of people who, they live in areas where no one around them shares their values. They recognize the difficulty of this, the problems with this, and they're trying to connect with those that do. And the only place they can do it is the internet for many of them, because they're so separated geographically from anyone else who shares, say, a particularly right-wing or traditional or Christian worldview, whichever one of these they might be focusing on. And so what has been happening is a lot of people are moving towards creating intentional communities, trying to organize with other people online to create spaces where they can move to and share those communities, share those values. In one sense, this seems a very positive usage, right? You're taking something that was purely digital, purely a simulation online, a community that was entirely artificial, and you're grounding it in real life. You're going to actually live together. You're going to actually create a community. You're going to try to bind people together in a more traditional sense. In the same way, most of these communities that originally existed were ones of, in many ways, geographical convenience. Their way of being was defined by the fact that their generations, their heritage, they grew up together. They formed this tradition because they were located to each other. It wasn't a they didn't pick from the sushi buffet, as you're talking about, to create an internet ideology or a way of life that they all wanted to share and then go into the community. They were in a community and they found each other in a situation where they needed to cooperate, they needed to communicate, they needed to share certain resources and experiences. And so things like language and religion became the substrate from which the community arose. What do you think about these intentional communities? Do they have a future? Are they missing something because they did not emerge from this more organic organization? What do you think?
One way of looking at this is it doesn't matter if you have community. It doesn't matter if you have friends. It doesn't matter if you have extended family. If you are failing to wage the spiritual war inside of yourself, if you are not doing the ascetic labors required to draw closer to God rather than to fall further away. Small towns are not going to save you, like all you have to do is like read those early Stephen King novels. And yeah, the guy definitely not a Christian, but definitely right that like the village can be a hell. It can be a horrible place. It depends on what's going on inside of each person's heart. And so if you find yourself in a position where, unfortunately you go to work and you come home and you're in your neighborhood or you're in your micro apartment or whatever, and there just doesn't seem to be anyone around you who helps you to wage that spiritual battle in your heart, rather than making it harder for you to do that, right. Yeah. Pick up the phone and find some folks who can maybe help you out a little bit, give you a little encouragement, share some, some memes of saints quotes or what, like it's clear, like one is going to be more helpful than the other. But again, this is like, if you find yourself in the wilderness and you have no food and no water, what you eat and what you drink are probably not going to be ideal, and they're not going to be a proper substitute for proper nutrition. But yes, try the berries, like eat the fungus, like see if you can make it to the next day. So there's a role there, and that I've seen it work. There are definitely people and definitely situations where having that lifeline to those people who you can confide in, people who are helping you, not hurting you in your spiritual life, are on the internet, and they're getting harder to find in real life. I don't think it's that controversial to observe that. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge like there are costs to more and more people leaning that way rather than doing, the even more difficult work of making that happen in real life, in their own neighborhood. Turning your back on your neighbor is not going to be the path to spiritual wellness, if I can put it that way. It's if enough people do that, and I think you're already starting to see this, not just in the big cities, but in rural communities too, where it's like the civic core of the neighborhood is disintegrating because people are saying, well, there's this magic box right here, and inside the magic box is I don't know, 100,000, a million, 10 million people who are just clapping and nodding along to everything I'm saying as if I was Stephen Colbert and they were my live studio audience. Like they can't get enough of me because I'm just like them, except maybe a little bit better. That is extremely damaging to the fundamental structures of real life, not just the family. Although you go to Alexis de Tocqueville, and what was he worried about? He was worried about an onrushing future in which people would become so isolated and so interchangeable and insignificant in their own experience that they would retreat even inside the family into their own little rooms and just kind of be stuck in their own headspace. And that's definitely happening. And it's happening in ways that Tocqueville understood were a problem for us, but it's also happening in, clearly much more exaggerated and intense ways that he didn't see coming.
So you've mentioned a few times that really we can adjust kind of these outside factors, and they may or may not have different advantages. It might be, you build those support systems, yes, those kind of things. But you mentioned repeatedly that really it's the internal struggle. Ultimately, it's the decision to be searching for God, or to be, doing that work internally that is going to matter most. Like I said, for a lot of people watching this, that's going to sound nice, but incredibly foreign, and they're going to have no way, to figure out how to take that first step. So if you're speaking to someone who's just completely disconnected from any spiritual tradition, just doesn't know, has heard about, Christianity at some point, that kind of thing, but really is just not familiar with what it would mean to reconnect to that, what would you say would be the best way for them to begin? Some attempt at an earnest journey towards faith.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think it is that foreign to people deep down. I think people are very well acquainted with their darkness, very well acquainted with their demons, whether literally or as shorthand for their sins, the passions and the desires that are dragging them down in life. I think everyone has a pretty honest. It's hard to ignore those things, to pretend they're not there, to rebrand them as actually the most fabulous things about you, which, there's a relentless propaganda campaign in the society to rebrand the desires and passions that bring you down in your life as superpowers. And it's disgusting, and it's out there, but people know, they really know better. And if you want to begin that ascetic spiritual struggle, it's not some abstract thing. You don't have to go find a monastery. Although if you want to go visit a monastery, please do. I think you'll get a window into a whole nother way of understanding how to make it through this life. But you can start right wherever you are right now, unless you're like driving a fire truck or something. You could probably sit down and be quiet and arrive pretty quickly at a recognition of what it is in your life that you're doing to yourself that is hurting you spiritually and probably also physically, that is bringing you down, that is making you hate yourself or feel depressed about yourself. It can be something big and horrendous, like, those 10 people I killed, like, still bothers me, right? Or it can be something relatively trivial, like, I see that I've gone from a bottle of wine a night to a bottle and a half of wine tonight. Like, doesn't make me feel great about myself. Well, what do? Do you try to like stop cold turkey? Porn, whatever it is. You can try, sure, but oftentimes what happens, and this is, you have centuries of testimony of saints saying, like, don't try to take it all on at once. This is pride. You will fail, and then you will think that you deserve condemnation, that you deserve to be abandoned by God. And maybe that is what you deserve, but this is a God of infinite love who's ready to forgive you if you are ready to even start trying to turn the ship in the other direction. So take that small step. If you're tired of drinking a bottle and a half of wine a night, take it down to a bottle and a quarter today, right? Take it down to a bottle by the end of the week. It's kind of like going to the gym. You go to the gym, you're not satisfied with your progress. You're not going to just add 2 more plates and fail and want to kill yourself. You got to be patient. You have to be patient, and you have to have the discipline to trust that it's big things happen from small beginnings, and that advancement is cumulative. And if you try to rush it, if you try to shortcut it, if you try to do substitutes instead of supplements, you are going to hurt yourself even more. So I think people actually know this, and they just feel in their hearts, well, I would do it this way, but I can't, but I'm too crazy, but I'm too much a victim of injustice, but I don't have enough money. There's always a but, and that's part of what everyone goes through. So, taking on that spiritual journey is hard to do when you are entirely on your own. And that's why people who went into the desert, 1,000+ years ago to try to take on that spiritual struggle alone. That is why we still know their names and we still talk about them. This has always been with us, and I think, if you have extend a little bit of mercy to people and a little bit of understanding and meet them where they're at spiritually, you will discover that that these things are not so foreign to them, and that they do have this awareness in their hearts, and they're just trying to figure out how to begin.
You mentioned earlier that technology didn't create this problem, that the desire for the simulation as to nothing is not a new thing. But I do think there is the question of technology and whether the medium itself or the technology itself can have an overall positive or negative impact. There's a lot of people who think that you basically need to abandon all of this, just Uncle Ted your way, out of this problem. There are some people who say there's simply no avoiding the technology, and it's only going to become more and more a part of our lives. So you might as well embrace that and find the best way forward with it. I understand that part of the answer is just going to be, well, the answer is going to be different for everybody. I understand that. But in general, do you feel like there's a technological avoidance that's necessary to reconnect with the reality? Do you think that there's just inescapable and you need to find a way to manage it as you move forward together? Do you think it can actually be a positive tool for reconnecting these things? Is there an overall understanding of the role that technology could play in the spiritual health of people?
Well, I don't think there's any question that this particular technological system that we are constructing and being onboarded into, oftentimes without any say over exactly how that goes on, that the power of this technology is to kind of combine the power of all previous technologies into a force that has exponentially increased powers of escape, I guess you could say. Like, want to run away from God? This rocket ship will blast you off there. Want to run away from your fellow man? Like, step right through this portal. Want to run away from your memories? Right this way, folks. It's admission is free. Like, this is different from what has come before. It's not totally different. We got to remember, like, the guy at the screening of 2001 who ran down the middle of the aisle screaming, "I see God," and like smashed through the screen. I mean, these feelings have been with us for a long time, but there is something about digital technology that is especially disincarnate and especially tempting and especially deceiving. You just go back to the Turing test, the insanity of the Turing test. Oh, like we can tell whether a computer is as smart as a human being if it tricks a human being into thinking that it's as smart as a human. Like, this doesn't, I'm mangling it a little bit, but for dramatic effect, like, we really need to like remember that the smartest people are as capable of being deluded as the dumbest people, and in some cases in even more important and dangerous things than the dumb people can be deluded. That's all out there. So I think there are some unique and special things about digital technology that ought to make us exercise heightened discernment. But you look at Ted Kaczynski, and this is an example of this longing for escape. I mean, you want to go live in the woods, have some quiet time, like, okay, all right. But what do you really, why? In service of what? If you want to prevent the technological apparatus from taking over the world, does it really make sense to move into the woods and start building technological apparati that you then like mail to people for the purpose of killing them? Like, that seems maybe not to be logically consistent. But Uncle Ted, Ted Kaczynski wasn't just trying to escape the technological apparatus. It seems to me he was also trying to escape God, and he was trying to escape his fellow man. And if you're really trying to escape the world and escape your fellow man, you would better be doing that in service of trying to really approach God in a serious and humble way. Because if that's not part of it, then what are you doing really? Then your motives are suspect. And I think a lot of Americans really like the idea of escape, and they like the idea that, like, well, worst comes to worst, I can just kind of hit the road and be gone. And it's getting harder to do that. It's getting harder to do that just geographically in the country we live in, as it's filling up with large numbers of people who are, legally speaking, not supposed to be present in this country. It's also getting hard to do conceptually and spiritually. And the internet is part of this project that has formed to fill up the world and to fill up a clone of the world, so that we can all move over there and really, really escape God this time, once and for all, and escape creation with it, and escape all of the limits of our given human form, and escape the humility and the patience and the discipline that is required to actually achieve divinity, instead of this off the shelf version, which people, it looks good, it sounds good, you get in the box, and then you realize that it's not what it seemed. If you want to watch something that dramatizes this, you can watch like Hellraiser, where the sort of demonic guy from another dimension, who looks like he's earned a stripe on the pride flag all his own, says, "The box, you opened it, we came." I mean, this is ancient stuff that we are confronting with new force, not for the first time, but in a distinctive way. And I think we must always interrogate ourselves as to whether we are trying in our lives, with our eyes glued to screens or not, whether we are trying to escape or avoid God's presence in our life.
Yeah, that makes me think about Oswald Spengler. Of course, he refers to Western man as Faustian, which has obviously the very important connotations. And one of the traits of Faustian man that he points out is the need for infinite space, to the point where he says, once Faustian man has conquered all of this open space, he will create new spaces. And you could think of, for conquest, but also for escape, as you say. The conquest is one way to understand it, but another way is getting as far away as possible in all of these situations from where you were. And while the digital realm has created what seems like infinite space, you can lose yourself forever in social media and video games, and the infinite worlds for you to conquer, infinite places for you to run to, infinite simulations of important experiences for you to have. Ultimately, we eventually do come back to this spiritual emptiness that we can't truly ever really avoid. And it does feel like, in many ways, while the technological realm has created this infinite space, we are coming to the consequences of that in a very real way. We are feeling the edges of that. The space might go on forever, but can we survive moving through it? And I think that's really something that a lot of people are feeling right now. They thought that escape would be available to them forever, but once they hit a certain point of life, or once they get to a certain point where the meeting is so abstract and they no longer feel any connection, they recognize that actually time is running out, space is running out. There is only so far you can go. There's only so much escaping you can go, or you can do. And especially as the consequences in the real world of, I think, competency collapsing and law and order collapsing, and these other things that hold that artificial world aloft falling apart under it. As more and more of that base erodes, people come into contact with the reality in very harsh ways, and recognize that they do have to find a way back to something real.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's this guy Nick Land, who you're probably familiar with, and maybe some others aren't. Maybe that's a good thing. It's also a story for another day. But the first thing that I ever read from Nick Land, and I will out myself and say that it was the first and the last thing that I read from Nick Land, because I felt like it was all that I needed to sort of take and run with. And that was an essay called "The Lure of the Void." And I won't spoil it for those watching at home who want to know what's in the box. but I think the lure of the void is real. And I think what's so dangerous about it is there is no void. There is no place where there's nothing in this created universe, in all of creation. And when you talk about Faustian man and the desire to just stay one step ahead of your own creator by frantically and ingeniously filling up more space, you do get to a point where you're like, well, we need more space. How do we create more space? Okay, well, we created cyberspace. Nice. Now there's a new thing for us to fill up. And then we fill up cyberspace. And then, what do we do? Well, I guess we need to get off planet and we need to go, this is maybe a less arcane reference is the film Interstellar. And, the big joke for me about Interstellar is like men will literally fly into a black hole instead of going to church. That is my take on Interstellar. But this is Faustian man, right? Faustian man ultimately finds himself in a position of needing nothing in order to sort of like, okay, we raped nature, we raped man, we raped the planet, we raped everything that we could so that we could conceive this new stuff. And so now the only place that we have left to rape is the void. So we got to go out there and find the void, and maybe we'll be maybe the black hole will destroy us, but it's a risk worth taking because we need to create more stuff. And the only way that we can create more stuff is by forcibly reaching into the void and creating something out of nothing. That ain't going to happen because there is no nothing in our created cosmos.
All right, guys, I think we're going to head over to the questions of the people. But before we do, James, where can people find all of your great work?
Assuming that it's all great, they can find me.
Where can they find the bad work? Tell them that first, then we'll know.
That's a story for another day for sure. I am on x.com at James Poulos. I am also on YouTube and at Blaze TV. The show is 0 Hour. Got to get you on there at some point soon. Scattered across the internet, also in Blaze's Tech Vertical Return, where you can see my various scribblings. One am I leaving out? There's lots of stuff, maybe too much stuff. So read with discernment, folks.
I think that's a good start. All right, guys, let's head over to your questions. Tiny Stupid Demon says, greetings from Aurora, Colorado. Really? Where what you call anarcho-tyranny, we refer to as co-governing with our new Venezuelan friends. Yeah, man, I've seen that video on Twitter. Stay safe. Looks bad.
This is a land of wolves now.
I'm sorry?
This is a land of wolves now.
Yeah, for sure. Excuse me. All right, let's see. Michael Robertson says, clean your grave, bucko. Well done. Nice. Well done. Let's see here. John Morton says, it's possible to LARP it till you live it. If some stopped drinking and went to church every week, would it matter if they didn't believe in God? Well, and I think more importantly, once you start to take those actions, you find yourself believing more and more. C.S. Lewis had I'll butcher the quote real quick, as I find myself, or I'm told to love my neighbor. I don't love my neighbor. I act as if I love my neighbor, and sooner or later, magically, I find myself loving my neighbor. And that doesn't sound real until you've lived those experiences and you recognize that's exactly how life actually works. It's very rarely an intellectual decision you make right on the spot, and is much more often a way of being, a pattern of behavior that leads you closer to the things that are true and real. But I don't know, what do you think?
One of the great lines from Hamlet, where he's chewing out his mom for sleeping with his his father's evil brother, and he's like, look, just start not doing it, because habit can change the stamp of nature.
Yep. John also follows up with, plus you might not believe in God, but if you bring your children up in the faith, then they will at least have healthy values. Yeah, and again, that by simply sharing that experience with your children, by making that something that your family does together, by having that be something that binds you together, you are much more likely to grow in that direction. And I have so many friends who really are in this position, who say, I don't believe and I'm not sure how to believe, but I want my kids to believe. I want the next generation to know this joy, to know this peace, to know that this is something that they started young. And so I think it is available to you. But if you're bringing your children to it and that's your motivation, well, that's a great motivation, man. So I thoroughly encourage that.
And it is also a token of belief in its own right, I think.
Mm-hmm. Very much. That's very true. Just being willing to sacrifice that time, make that time, invest that is itself a statement of belief on some level. And then Darth Novikov, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly, two of my favorite prophetic voices. Thank you for the conversation. I feel a sense of loss for my children who are growing up in a world so foreign to what I remember. Any words of encouragement? What do you got, James?
Help them remember. Teach them what was. All things come and go on this earth, and we do have to, every single day we got to get out there and do our part to keep things from passing away and for being lost to memory. So it's always work that needs to be done. I think that's the consolation.
Yeah, if you want the flame kept, you've got to keep it. You can't sit around waiting for someone else. You can't lament that the whole culture is no longer behind you. There are many religious traditions, many communities that have survived much worse and have managed to battle through all of these things because they were dedicated to who they are and what they believed in and what they stood for, and they were willing to pass that down to their children and defend that, with their sacred honors. And I think ultimately that's really what you have to remember is, you can do that, but it's got to be about, you taking that action. You can't just lament the fact that the rest of the culture is not doing that for you. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, but make sure you are following James, that you're watching his show. He does great work. If it's your first time on this YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe, click the bell, notifications, all that stuff that lets YouTube know you actually want to watch things when they go live. If you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, make sure that you subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to pick up my new book, The Total State, you can do that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, anywhere that books are sold. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I'll talk to you next time.